On ABC News and News Radio, welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Ciadello.
This week, the inevitable Trump presidency, how leaders from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama helped to pave the way. Our guest, journalist and author, Nick Bryant.
Plus, lots of polls show the state of the race heading into the final stretch. And we'll also have a look at the state of the pandemic, which could prove to be just as important come November.
But first, it was the week when the 2020 presidential race turned to more traditional campaigning after almost 6 months of largely socially distant and virtual events.
Yeah, poor old Joe Biden, his final day of online campaigning involved him doing a marvellous impression, I thought, of 80s icon Max Headroom.
Violence of extremists and opportunists, right-wing militias, 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 militias.
He really hit that malicious point, I thought.
Yeah, they're already talking about him just being a computer-generated candidate. He's not really, hasn't left the basement at all.
That's right. Well, then he did leave the basement, and his first day of more conventional campaigning didn't start too smoothly either, John.
Hey, Joe! You finally got out of the basement! Hey, Joe, who paid for those pizzas? Hey, Joe, who paid for Trump who gave us steak? That's right, Joe!
Don't jump! Don't jump!
Literally his first step in normal campaigning, he's getting heckled.
Yeah. Look, both President Trump and Joe Biden started clocking up their air miles this week. Both travelled to Kenosha, Wisconsin, the scene of last week's police shooting of Jacob Blake and the apparent vigilante killing of 2 protesters by a 17-year-old Trump supporter. And speaking of cobwebs in the campaign, Chaz, Joe Biden has clearly been working from home for a little bit too long, forgetting himself as he stepped off his private jet earlier today. He shook this guy's hand and then touched his own face mask with the same hand. Joe Biden then took part in a community meeting in Wisconsin, and probably wisely, the organisers gave everyone a bit of a refresher.
I just want to remind everyone that this event has been set up to adhere to social distancing guidelines. Accordingly, please keep your mask on while you are speaking in accordance with the governor's mandate.
Joe Biden then listened to community members talk about racism and policing issues in their town for the next 20 minutes or so before speaking himself. It was a very, very low-key Joe Biden, still wearing the mask, perhaps in keeping with the church venue, but he did make this important promise about his campaign.
I really am optimistic. I promise you, win or lose, I'm going to go down fighting. I'm going to go down fighting for racial equality, equity across the board. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, endowed by their Creator. Well, that may be what your birthright was, but it's very different than actually being treated equally, being treated the same. Everything from black mortality rates in pregnancy, straight through to educational opportunities, and everything in between. But the country's ready. And if they're not, it doesn't matter, because there are certain things I ain't gonna change. There are certain things worth losing over. And this is something worth losing over if we have to, but we're not gonna lose.
Now, it was an interesting performance, Chaz, because clearly Joe Biden is going for the sense of the small room and his sense of empathy and his values and so on. Very different Joe Biden to what we saw 2 weeks ago at the DNC. But the problem, of course, is that then gets transmitted around the world and on the internet, and he looks like Sleepy Joe, old Joe, low-intensity Joe Biden.
Out of breath Joe.
Yeah, which wasn't a great performance. Compare that to Donald Trump. He was, instead of aligning himself with social justice issues, it was very much police over the protesters. It's all about law and order.
We cherish our law enforcement. We wouldn't be here without our law enforcement. Even me, I'm here today. I feel so safe. And you went through hell just a few days ago, but I feel so safe. I better be safe. I better be safe. But we're all safe, and we're safe because of law enforcement. And we honor you, and I will say this, we have to condemn the dangerous anti-police rhetoric. It's getting more and more. It's very unfair.
So this week, the campaign starts, the battle lines are drawn fairly clearly.
Yeah.
So far, do you have a sense as to whether the law and order rhetoric is hitting home or just talking to Trump's base right now? And how's Joe Biden countering it by saying, hey, I'm not this wild-eyed socialist as Trump suggests?
Well, it doesn't really matter what I think. I look at the polls, and because that's what matters. And this is what I would say. I would say that Trump has had a fairly charmed run on this line for the last 2 weeks because he had the Republican convention, spent an entire week pushing this line, the law and order campaign. They pushed it as hard as they could while Kenosha was happening. Okay, so that was the best rollout for this line they could possibly have. And at the end of that, when asked in the Fox News poll who is better to handle policing criminal justice, Biden was winning 47-42 in Arizona, 47-42 in Wisconsin, where Kenosha happened. Now, that doesn't mean that this is not going to work, because who knows what's going to happen over the next 2 months. There might be another shooting, riots everywhere. We don't know. But all I would say is Trump would have hoped to have made more ground, I think. We'll talk about the polls in a second. He expected to make more ground with this line by now, and I think he'd be worried about this line. He's not known for his discipline. I wouldn't be surprised if he changes tack soon, if he doesn't get some kind of result soon. Yeah.
The other thing I'd add as well, I think that as we enter this final 60-day stretch as well, there is more of a focus on the random elements of campaigning. So yes, journalists will tend to acknowledge the issues and the battle lines, but they will also talk about the hecklers. They'll talk about the technical glitches, the gaffes, the awkward moments. These things get elevated. Now there's a meta-narrative around them. Is it really saying, you know, Joe Biden's campaign is amateurish, or these are the difficulties of, you know, doing things using a lot of technology, or is he really old, or is, you know, Donald Trump saying crazy things? So there is a broader narrative around these little missteps, but this, of course, is the danger. When you get out of the basement, suddenly the world is a less controlled place.
Yeah,
right.
and I suppose the question is, does Joe Biden, now he's out of the basement, become the Joe Biden who no one liked back in January again?
Right, the gaffe-prone Joe Biden we've known for almost 50 years.
We'll find out.
Well, President Trump travelled to another swing state this week, North Carolina, and he made a pretty extraordinary suggestion during a rally held on the local tarmac there. Take a look.
On your ballots, if you get the unsolicited ballots, send it in and then go make sure it counted. And if it doesn't tabulate, you vote. You just vote. And then if they tabulate it very late, which they shouldn't be doing, they'll see you voted, and so it won't count. So send it in early and then go and vote. And if it's not tabulated, you vote, and the vote is going to count. You can't let them take your vote away. These people are playing dirty politics.
Well, that suggestion of people attempting to vote twice, and if they haven't already counted their postal vote, then they should vote in person, therefore clearly creating the potential for two votes to be counted except for the checks and balances that exist. That led to North Carolina authorities to issue this stern warning.
Voting twice in an election is illegal. Yesterday, while visiting Wilmington, President Trump urged voters to vote by mail and then try to vote again in person to see if their vote was in fact counted. It is a felony under state law to vote twice. Once someone has cast an absentee ballot, that person may not change or cancel it or decide to vote in person on election day.
Months and months now, President Trump has been warning about the chaos that could be created by mail-in voting. Now he's essentially inciting that chaos.
Yes, I was going to say there's an important point to be made here, which is just on its own logic, what he's saying is incorrect. In that, 14 states, including the all-important Michigan and Pennsylvania, have laws that they're not allowed to even look at the mail-in ballot until election day. So there is no way that on election day anyone will know whether you voted by mail or not. They're not going to be looking at them until the next day, or that night. So what Trump is saying is actually incorrect. And what would occur, even if it was a perfect system, what would occur is they'll just create many more delays in the counting of mail-in ballots later on while they're trying to sort through all these double votes. So that is, if he wants the election to be called on the night, that is a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, it looks increasingly likely that this nightmare scenario of Donald Trump calling the election on the night because of in-person voting that has been counted, putting him in front in some of these swing states, and the mail-in votes that trickle in over the next week could in fact show Biden as won after all. So that scenario is one that people are getting particularly anxious about. It seemed a little far-fetched a month or two ago, but now not so much.
I've got a poll on that. Emerson poll from this week where it was Biden ahead 49-47. So that may well be the final number. That sounds like a close election. Okay, people voting on the day, Trump 67-28. People voting early in person, Trump 50-49. People voting by mail, Biden 67-28. So that's exactly that situation.
For Democrats right now, traditionally they push absentee voting because usually about a quarter of all voters will tend to vote absentee, vote by mail, and they see it and early voting as a way of locking in a vote, getting it in there. It's all taken care of, so you don't have to worry so much about the long queues on election day. But right now, I mean, what should their strategy be? Should it be to say, actually, forget all the warnings about COVID, we need you to turn up because we're no longer confident that these postal votes are going to be counted?
Look, I've personally always been a fan of early voting under the COVID scenario when there aren't long queues, hopefully, if they have long enough hours for early voting, because I personally have concerns about mail-in voting, about your vote being counted. I'm not worried about voter fraud. We should say, by the way, on the vote, every time we bring this up, we should just point this out, that there are 5 states that have completely mail-in voting, where they send out the ballots beforehand to everyone, just like Trump's talking about. And if you look at 3 of those states, Colorado, Oregon and Washington, okay, all the voters proactively receive ballots in the mail there, okay? You look at the last 2 elections, there have been 372 possible cases of double voting or voting on behalf of deceased people out of 14.6 million votes. That's mail votes. So we're talking a possible fraud rate, probably less, of 0.0025%. Okay, so they're the states that already do this. Having said that, there's all these states that are going to go from 5% absentees up to 50%. There's going to be all kinds of screw-ups there. So I reckon they should stay away from that system as much as they can. Not for fraud reasons, but just to get your vote counted reasons.
Yeah. Joe Biden now leaving the basement, going out and about, going to churches, going to a variety of community venues. Is this a part of messaging that says, at least for now, it is safe? Wear the mask, do the right thing, try not to shake people's hands, that there has to be a pivot now towards saying in-person voting, it's as safe as going to the supermarket, it's something you should plan in advance and do.
They've already started doing this. Ever since they started worrying about the Postal Service, they've been talking. And by the way, we should talk about the Postal Service as well, because that is what's been spearheading this concern from the Democrats ever since they started worrying about the Postal Service, which, by the way, we should update people on because everyone is paranoid about, is the mail-in system going to work at all with the Postal Service? Data for Progress put out a poll just this week showing 78% of Democrats are very concerned the administration may use the Postal Service to disrupt voting this year. That compares to 26% of Republicans being very worried and 37% of independents. Well, the Postmaster General actually testified to the Senate and House last week, so we should tell you what he said. Firstly, he denied that he had anything to do with the removing of mail collection boxes.
Since my arrival, we removed 700 post collection boxes, of which I had no idea that was a process, or that was a process. When I found out about it, I decided to stop it, and we'll pick it up after the election.
And he spoke of these figures here: 260,000 mailboxes removed in 35 years. So 700 mailboxes removed in 3 months actually is pretty much on target. As for removing mail sorting machines, he also said he had nothing to do with that. He said it was due to a massive reduction in first-class mail volume of about 50% in 20 years. Although, interestingly, no one asked him why, when they cut only mail sorting machines by 125 in 2018 and 186 in 2019, they've cut as many as 671 mail sorting machines already this year. They did ask him, though, about cutting overtime, and he had the numbers ready there as well.
We're being told that you're limiting overtime, and this could possibly add to backlogs. Are you limiting overtime, or is that being suspended right now and people will work overtime if necessary to move the mail out efficiently every single day?
Senator, we never eliminated overtime.
Curtailed significantly. It's gone down. It's been limited. Will you commit to setting?
Since I've been here, we've spent $700 million on overtime. Overtime runs at a 13% rate before I got here, and it runs at a 13% rate now.
Okay, but the real issue the experts have been worried about is none of that. That's what the media have been talking about. The experts have been worried that until this election, officials have been paying for cheaper marketing mail rates for mail-in ballots and receiving the faster service of first-class mail. But this year, the Postal Service said they couldn't afford to do that, and there were fears that mail-in ballots would be delivered much slower because of that. So Democrats asked Joy flat out if that was the case.
Get into the election now. There has been concern that I'm hearing from state and local governments about first-class mail. Do you have your word that you're not going to mandate that states send out any ballots using either the more expensive first-class mail? And will you continue the processes and procedures to allow election mail to move as expeditiously as possible and treat it like first class?
Yes, sir. We will deploy processes and procedures that advance any election mail, in some cases ahead of first class mail.
Okay, so if he's telling the truth, there is no problem. But is he telling the truth? We'll keep you posted.
After that, I wanted to sit there quietly and listen to the polls. All the effort that went into those conventions, the Democrat and Republican convention, it seems that the polls have been largely unmoved. This week, the national average has Joe Biden 7.2 points in front of President Trump. On the Friday before the convention started back in mid-August, Biden was 7.7 points in front, so maybe a half-point shift there, but Biden is actually also up just a little overall. In the 9 national polls released this week, Joe Biden led by between 4 and 11 points. In 4 of them, he was on 50% or higher. That could be crucial. There are a lot more battleground state polls coming through this week as well, and they suggest a tighter race. In Pennsylvania, a state that Donald Trump won unexpectedly in 2016, it is a tie. That, according to Rasmussen, Biden is 8 points up, according to Quinnipiac, 3 points up in a Monmouth poll this week. On average, Joe Biden's lead there is just over 4 points. In the Electoral College, Biden's lead is blown out this week, with North Carolina and Ohio swinging back into the Democrats' column. He is on 352 Electoral College votes to Trump's 186, 270 to win, of course. That is getting pretty close to Barack Obama's margin of victory over John McCain in 2008, when he also won nationally by 7 points.
Yeah, I should also say that Monmouth, Pennsylvania result is even closer than it appears, because under their high turnout model, Biden was 3 points ahead, but under their low turnout model, Biden was only ahead by 1. And bear in mind, 6 weeks ago, under the same conditions, Biden was ahead by 10 points under the high turnout model and ahead by 7 points under the low turnout model.
Yeah, and a lot of these models, of course, also depend on whether you're polling registered voters up until maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago and whether you're defining them as likely voters now. And that turnout model as well is a very interesting overlay as well. According to the official TV ratings from Nielsen, across the 11 network and cable stations that broadcast Trump's nomination speech a week ago, which went for an hour and 10 minutes, plus fireworks, they were watched by 23.8 million people, while Joe Biden's speech a week prior to that, which was just 24.5 minutes, actually shorter than Melania Trump's speech, and very few fireworks, just 1 or 2, it attracted 24.6 million viewers. In the 10 p.m. primetime hour across the 4 nights, almost 2 million more viewers tuned into the DNC on average. Cue the anti-Trump Republicans at Lincoln Project.
Uh-oh, Donald. Bad news. The ratings are in for your convention. It's not pretty.
Biden had better ratings than the president last night.
Joe Biden beat you. By a lot.
The TV president, the reality TV president who sold himself as a showman.
Below Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
And these two
is yet to come.
Embarrassing. Democrats beat you in ratings every night, except one. When your wife was giving a speech. Ouch.
Ouch indeed.
Trolls.
Trolling mission accomplished. They did get the president to bite on Twitter.
We had far more people, many millions, watching us at the RNC than did Sleepy Joe in the DNC, and yet an ad just ran saying the opposite. This is what we're up against. Lies, but we will win.
So what gives, Chaz? Are these lies? Who actually won?
Well, look, there is the TV ratings, but there's also the online ratings. This is where it gets complicated. The Republicans supposedly drew 147 million viewers overall for the 4 nights on TV and online, compared to only 122 million viewers for the Democratic convention. Obviously, the only online viewers that matter are Americans, not people like us. So TV ratings kind of mean more, but also I use the word supposedly at the beginning there for a reason, because you know who put those online numbers together?
Who?
Turns out the Trump campaign put them together, so you might take that with a pinch of salt.
Yeah, a pretty big one. In fact, it takes me back to January 2017.
This was the largest audience to ever witness an inauguration, period, both in person and around the globe.
Where's Spicy when you need him? Now, of course, the other measure of relative success of these conventions is the money, and Joe Biden must be feeling rather chipper right now. In August, he raised a record $364.5 million, Biden and DNC, an eye-popping figure that more than doubles his previous 2 months and Trump's best ever month in July, when he raised $165 million. It also outstrips the old record for fundraising in a month, $193 million set by Barack Obama back in September 2008. Possible difference in August, as well as the conventions, of course, the announcement of Kamala Harris as Biden's running mate. The Trump campaign has yet to announce their latest numbers.
Yeah, that could be big. Can I suggest, though, something that might be of greater importance than any poll, TV ratings result, or fundraising report, and that is, it's going to sound weird, the fact that the Big Ten college football season was recently cancelled due to coronavirus. Dr. Dave Smith spoke about that at length on our podcast, but they took that tournament very seriously in America. And the states involved, get this, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania and Iowa. Kind of important states, right? Now guess which states Joe Biden has been running this ad in.
Good weather by opening day standard. We're going to be in the 60s. Enjoy the game. And now, to honor America, please join in the singing of our national anthem.
Now, there have been a number of reports about the White House desperately trying to get that season back on. And Laura Ingraham asked Trump about the issue in their interview this week, and he launched into a 3-minute answer. I mean, get a load of this for defensive.
That's all done by Democrats. But just to show you how they lie and how they cheat, and the biggest problem you have, I want football back. By the way, are you watching? I want football, okay? Joe Biden doesn't even know football.
Okay, so he's pretty keen to emphasise, and look, to be fair to Trump, he wants nothing more than for everything to get back to normal. He's the one who keeps on saying, let's get everything back to normal. So he's probably feeling set up by this. But it's an important issue. It really does. It could make a difference.
Yeah, in terms of that sense of is America getting back on track? It's going to be things, well, maybe the vaccine, but also it's going to be the little things. It's going to be the football. It's going to be the colleges and whether the schools stay open, all that kind of stuff. Our guest this week, though, is Nick Bryant, BBC North America correspondent, historian and author of several books, including the newly released When America Stopped Being Great. In it, he challenges what to some is the comforting idea that the presidency of Donald Trump is a black swan event, an historical aberration. Instead, he argues that while unexpected, even shocking, it was also inevitable, the culmination of a period of growing partisanship, changing social and media standards, and decades of erosion of the public's trust. And with Trump as the result of this process, he kind of forces us to reappraise those who came before Trump as well. And Nick Bryant joins us from New York, New York. Nick, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
It's great to be back on Planet America again. Thanks for inviting me.
Nick, it is a compelling and yet also deceptively simple observation at the core of this book, the inevitability of Donald Trump, that he isn't this historical outlier. But I wonder, how do you explain how the same nation that went for the kind of sunny optimism of a reborn America under Ronald Reagan in 1980 and 84 turned to the kind of negativity, the American carnage of Donald Trump in 2016 and 2020?
Yeah, I do argue that Donald Trump wasn't an accident. He wasn't an aberration. He'd almost become historically inescapable by 2016. So many American trend lines going back decades had been converging and culminating in his candidacy. When Donald Trump said the American dream was dead, so many people believed him. People who felt like castaways in a globalized economy, people who felt like castaways in the new economy. The Republican Party had changed its character. It had essentially become an anti-Obama party. Who was the most virulently anti-Obama candidate? Donald Trump. Technology worked in his favor. It had normalized narcissism. It had placed in his hands these weapons on the internet, Twitter and Facebook. Culturally, what were we watching on television? We were watching reality TV. Racially as well. The Obama years, alas, 8 years of a black American president did not heal America's racial breach. And Donald Trump, again, somebody who'd made his name in the birther movement, exploited that. You know, Donald Trump wasn't an aberration. And as I argue in the book, it really went back to 50 years and Ronald Reagan. It's morning in America again.
When Reagan came to power, he was offering morning in America after the civil rights era had seen a lot of social strife, law and order elections in the late 60s, early 70s, the loss in Vietnam, of course. So there was a restoration feel there as well. But it was a very positive kind of a campaign. It was a positive form of conservatism that he was offering. Why was Trump's so different in tone, would you say?
I think Donald Trump benefited enormously from the legacy of Ronald Reagan. I mean, Ronald Reagan created the modern-day celebrity presidency that we've come to see, this performative presidency, which is more about the front office aspects of the job rather than the back office aspects of the job. It was about delivering those great set-piece speeches, those great sort of whether it was at the Brandenburg Gate or the beaches overlooking Normandy. He also created the modern-day conservative movement that we recognise today. He brought in the NRA. Ronald Reagan was the first person that had actually endorsed a presidential candidate, the NRA. He brought in the evangelical Christians. He made the Republican Party and the conservative movement more broadly the home of people who, prior to the civil rights movement, had voted for the Democrats. Ronald Reagan really laid a path in many ways for Donald Trump. And of course, who was the great avatar of Reaganism in the 1980s? What was the great totem of Reaganism? It was Trump Tower, and it was Donald Trump. So he benefited enormously. And the rhetoric was the same again. Who said, make America great again? Ronald Reagan first tried that line. It was a different type of conservatism. Donald Trump definitely was exploiting the grievances that people had felt as the 21st century had gone on. He wasn't as optimistic as Reagan was in his conservatism, but he was a great cheerleader for America. And there were real similarities between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump.
Nick, you've talked about the trends from Reagan to Trump, but were these same trends affecting the Democrats as well? I imagine some of our viewers who are Democrats would find it difficult to believe that Obama has anything in common with Trump, but does he?
Well, I certainly argue that in the book that every president contributed in some way to the rise of Donald Trump. George Herbert Walker Bush failed to resist the radical right, the rise of Newt Gingrich, who was one of the great godfathers of polarization. Bill Clinton, again, he was a very polarizing figure. And he came from a generation that was very different. The baby boomers, when they took over from the greatest generation, they had a very different approach to politics. The greatest generation, those who'd fought in World War II, really had a great sense of patriotic bipartisanship. They had fought together against Nazism. They knew what real war was like. But the baby boomers, like Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, had grown up in the cultural wars of the 1960s. And they brought that sort of combative streak to Washington. You know, Barack Obama, well, how did he contribute to the rise of Donald Trump? Well, he never really fixed the problems with the new economy. One of the great mistakes that Bill Clinton made was not only to deregulate Wall Street, which contributed to the financial crash in 2008 and the Great Recession, he failed to adequately regulate the new economy. There was this belief when the internet started out that so many startups were failing that government really didn't need to intervene. Well, it did. And Barack Obama never really dealt with the iniquities of the new economy, these huge disparities of wealth, these people, as I say, who felt that the American dream just wasn't working for them. And he also brought the celebrity presidency into the digital age. Again, it was a very performative presidency. It was a kind of, you know, many people liken Barack Obama's presidency to a high-end version of the Kardashians. And again, Donald Trump was a beneficiary of that.
I wonder, Nick, given that every president since Reagan has been measured against Reagan, even though in your book you do kind of chip away quite successfully at the sort of the golden aura that persists after Reagan's death about who he was and what he achieved. I wonder, do you think that Donald Trump will have a 30-year plus influence on not just Republican leaders, but potentially Democratic presidents as well?
Yeah, it's really interesting the impact that Reagan had over the decades, not just for Republicans. You know, Republicans talk about passing the Reagan test. You've got to sort of adhere to certain values that Reagan stood for, even though in the modern day conservative movement, Ronald Reagan would fail the Reagan test himself. But he also had a very big impact on the Democratic Party. They made big ideological concessions because they were so spooked by his victory in 1984. He won 49 states. He almost won 50 out of 50. And this was in the middle of a period where the Republicans were absolutely dominant in presidential politics. Between 1968 and 1992, as you know, the Democrats only won once with Jimmy Carter, and that was after Watergate. Bill Clinton realized that the Democratic Party would have to change. So he started ventriloquizing a lot of Ronald Reagan's language. You know, when he spoke about the big era, the era of big government is over. Well, Ronald Reagan came to Washington the next week and accused Clinton not just of plagiarism, but grand larceny. And even Obama, when he ran in 2008, he was very praising of Ronald Reagan. Will Donald Trump have the same effect? Well, probably not on the Democratic Party. I don't think you'll see the Democratic Party making so many ideological concessions to Trump, although they probably will when I have a close look at why so many white working class voters like that sort of cultural appeal that he has. But I think, you know, one of the interesting things is how he's changed the Republican Party. You know, at the convention, there wasn't a platform. There isn't a kind of intellectual right that there has been over the past 40 years. As I say, the Republican Party had almost become an anti-Obama party, which is why Donald Trump found it so easy to become the presidential nominee. I think the big question, and it's unanswered, is, you know, if Trump does lose, what happens to Trumpism? It's going to be very hard for the conservative movement to make that go away. And I don't think there's even a sort of willingness or a desire in many quarters of the conservative movement for that to happen.
Do you have a vision, Nick, for what you imagine that this might look like in 20 years' time? Like if we follow these trends through the way they've been going for 30, 40 years, where do they go?
Look, one of the depressing things right now is that this country is so unrecognizable from the country that I came to as a teenager and fell in love with. I arrived here in 1984. It was the summer of the LA Olympics. It was that great summertime of American resurgence after the long national nightmare of Vietnam, Watergate, the Iranian hostage crisis. Reagan did really get the mojo of this country back. Like I said, he won 49 out of 50 states. What I worry about now, projecting forward, and if the trend lines continue, and I think many of them will, is that the United States will be an oxymoron, that term itself will be a misnomer. We've spoken for 20 years now of a post-American world, and my fear is of a post-America America. You know, I fear that we live now in America on land that is occupied by warring tribes. And whoever wins the next election, if it's Joe Biden, I don't see those divisions in the short term being repaired.
Nick, you know the deep vein of declinism in American thinking. From the Pilgrims onwards, there's been hand-wringing and fretting about it's all going to hell in a handbasket. Yet there's this incredible motor for reinvention, time and time again. After the darkest moment comes the dawn. Is that inevitable? Is that something innate to the United States? Or could it be that the sun at some point is no longer going to rise?
Look, I've never been a declinist. I've always believed in that saying, you know, America's always going to hell, but it never quite gets there. And whether it was after Sputnik, whether it was in the 60s, whether it was during Watergate, you know, there were so many times when people were writing off America. You know, people thought that Russia might win the Cold War. People thought after the Cold War, Japan would emerge and be the dominant nation in the world. And America still is the dominant nation, although obviously China is really muscling in there. But again, what worries me is this state of division. During all of those periods in the past where there were these kind of declinist panics, the politics was always functional. There was this sense of patriotic bipartisanship when Sputnik happened, when the Soviets managed to get that satellite up in the air. There was that sense of compromise on Capitol Hill. There were moderate conservatives, liberal Republicans and moderate Democrats that created the overlap where compromise could happen. But Washington now is so very dysfunctional. And I think another problem right now is the other vital centers of American power, which have always made America president-proof and Washington-proof to a certain extent, aren't functioning that well either. Wall Street's still got the structural problems that it had prior to 2008. Hollywood's suffering from the meteor effects of the Me Too movement. The great universities aren't the same engine of intergenerational social mobility that they used to be. Places like Miami, Houston, New Orleans, they face an almost existential threat from climate change. So many of the problems at a national level also play out at a local level too. And that's why, I've never been a declinist, but alas, I am now.
Great pleasure to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Great to see you.
Okay, John, let's talk COVID. We haven't had one of these updates for a while, so I'm going to make it good. Okay. America has now passed the 6 million case barrier in total as daily cases hover around the low 40,000s, while COVID deaths have slowly fallen to about 900 a day. That's 190,000 deaths in total now. And the significance of that is not that they're about to hit 200,000 deaths, it's that the administration is going to have to retire one of their favourite talking points.
However, we have held our fatality rate far below hard-hit other countries such as Spain and Italy and United Kingdom and Sweden.
There you go. Now, if we look at deaths per million people for all countries with a population over 1 million, the first thing you'll notice is that Peru is now the worst hit country in the world. But the next thing you'll notice is that America has just passed Sweden in deaths per million people. And given that European deaths have been greatly reduced now, America is about to pass Italy, the UK and Spain as well in the next month. In fact, in about a month, the top 6 in deaths per capita are going to be Belgium, America, and the countries south of America. However, to be fair, we should compare excess deaths where they're available. These are the extra deaths this year than you would normally expect, which probably reflect a better indication of the corona death toll. And here they are. Most countries don't collect these figures, but Europe does. And you can see the UK and Spain are still miles ahead of America in excess deaths per capita. By the way, if we do look at excess deaths, not only has America already racked up 215,000 deaths by the end of July, but their racial impact is not what you might expect. There have only been 9% more white deaths this year, but while there have been 31% more black deaths, there have actually been 35% more Asian deaths and 44% more Hispanic deaths. Anyway, that's deaths. What about some of the other measures? COVID hospitalisations, way down. They're about half what they were in July, so that's a good sign. There are fewer tests than there were, about 700,000 tests a day compared to a peak of over 800,000 a day, but the percentage of tests that are positive is now only 5.5%, which is very good. You want it to be under 10%, so that is great news. Regionally, there are still some hotspots though, with a bunch of states registering over 10% of tests as positive. In particular, North Dakota, South Dakota, Iowa and Kansas are considered the 4 most worrying states at the moment. But John, the big news today is actually about the economic effects of COVID. In particular, about the potentially 23 million renters who have been projected to be in danger of getting evicted in the next few months. Trump's Centre for Disease Control has issued a potentially massive order here. Just to give you some context, okay? Under the CARES Act, which had eviction protections, it only covered 28% of renters, okay? And when that expired in July, only 17 states had any protection for renters at all, whether you're unemployed or what. Lots of people getting evicted. Okay, now we've got this order. Let me tell you what it does. If you've tried to get government rental assistance and you earn less than $99,000 a year per person, and you're struggling for cash either because you were laid off or because of medical expenses, and you're doing your best to pay your rent or at least part of your rent, and if eviction would leave you either without a home or sharing a home with anyone else, then John, you cannot be evicted before the end of the year.
Wow.
You cannot be evicted. This will help up to 40 million renters, according to Steve Mnuchin, and there is serious enforcement attached. There was no enforcement under the CARES Act. $100,000 fines and potentially a year in jail for landlords who breach this rule. Now, there are some issues, like for instance, you still have to pay the rent eventually. So you're going to get a big bill come January, potentially. Also, there's all kinds of legal issues. Is it legal? Is it not legal? It's going to get challenged in court for sure. But this is potentially massive.
Yeah. and you can't help but think, if Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer had brought this to Steve Mnuchin wholesale, the White House would have said, not in a million years. We're not going to do this. And yet, when it's framed as, OK, here's how we make the problem go away till after the election, so we don't have this as a liability hanging over us, then suddenly, problem solved.
Ironically, the people who might be most upset about this are the landlords, of course, who aren't getting paid their rent in some cases. They're usually the Republican support base. They might start supporting Democrats. This is some weird things happening in this populist world, John.
But as you say, they'll get their back pay. And also, you know, with mass evictions comes mass residential vacancies. And no landlords want an empty apartment with no rent bill adding up. But look, before we go, we talked on Wednesday night about the president's strange comments on Fox News about the shadowy forces controlling Biden.
Take a look at what's going on. And Biden is, I don't even like to mention Biden because he's not controlling anything.
Who do you think is pulling Biden's strings? Is it former Obama
people
officials?
That you've never heard of, people that are in the dark shadows, people that...
What does that mean? That sounds like conspiracy theory. Dark shadows. What is that?
People that you haven't heard of.
You know, things have gotten pretty weird when Laura Ingraham is pulling you up saying, you're sounding a bit like a conspiracy theorist right now, Mr. President. But another clip came out this week that tops that. The secret weapon being used by Antifa, soup.
Soup. And they throw the cans of soup. That's better than a brick because you can't throw a brick, it's too heavy. But a can of soup, you can really put some power into that, right? Yes, sir. And then when they get caught, they say, no, this is soup for my family. They're so innocent. This is soup for my family. It's incredible.
Yes, it is incredible, Mr. President. And it's not just cans of soup either.
And you have people coming over with bags of soup, big bags of soup, and they lay it on the ground and the anarchists take it and they start throwing it at our cops, at our police. And if it hits you, that's worse than a brick because it's got force. It's the perfect size. It's like made perfect. And when they get caught, they say, no, this is just soup for my family.
So you can't throw a brick, but you can throw a bag of soup.
And bags of soup are worse than a brick, apparently. Look, the White House was able to offer no evidence to support this claim of bags of soup being thrown at police. The internet, though, has provided plenty of ridicule.
And then they have cans of soup. Soup.
You think you can get soup?
This is soup for my family. You have people coming over with bags of soup, big bags of soup.
Please, you're wasting everyone's time.
No, this is soup for my family. It's the perfect size. It's like made perfect.
You're pushing your luck, little man.
But a can of soup, you can really put some power into that, right?
Very good. Very good. You know something? No soup for you!
And on that note, that's it for a Fireside Chat. If you missed this week's Planet America, it is on iView and online now. Check out our Facebook page as well for the full interview with Biden's pollster, Celinda Lake. She had some fascinating insights into the state of this race, Chaz.
And I'm going to have a new pet podcast for you all. There's the address for that. See you next Wednesday for another trip to Planet America.
Bye-bye.